In Parshas Vayechi, we had mentioned in previous classes that we would like to come back to this issue because it's come up a few times throughout our discussions in the previous classes, which is the feeling that Yosef has towards his brothers at the end, and how much does he really make them feel better about what they had done. So if you have a chumash, otherwise I'll read it outside. It tells us on page 286, towards the end of Parshas Vayechi, that the brothers and Yosef all returned from burying Yaakov. And the Pasuk Tezvav on page 286 tells us, and the brothers of Yosef saw that their father had died, and they said, Lu yistamenu Yosef, perhaps Yosef hates us. V'hashev yashiv lanu eis kol hara'ah asher gamalnu also, and now he will finally pay us back for all the treachery we have shown him. As we've mentioned before, that the brothers had, one of their issues was they saw Yosef as a Esav kind of character, and so they expected vengeance. Now, even though Yosef had been nice to them all along, but clearly Yosef is a great actor. Right? He's put on quite a show for that very long time. So maybe this is all part of an act.
And Esav was going to kill Yaakov when
the father died. Right? So they came up with an amazing plan. Vayitzavu el Yosef lemor. They instructed Yosef. In other words, they came back to Yosef not with telling him what to do or asking him. They were coming with instructions from their father. Lemor, avicha tziva lifnei Moso. Your father instructed us. How convenient is that? Because if Yaakov really wanted the brothers to forgive Yosef, to forgive the brothers, he should have said it to Yosef, but the brothers can't. So they have come up with this new story. They said, Father instructed before his death that we should say to Yosef, please forgive the sins of your brothers and their transgression, for they have done you evil. So now please forgive the servants of the God of your father. In other words, they're saying, Father said that we should tell you that you are to please forgive us, your brothers, and not just we're brothers, we're also servants of God, we're of the same belief as you, and therefore we want you to forgive us. And Yosef cries. No response. No responsive words. He just cries. So, how would they take it? How do they understand it? So they're understanding that he's refusing, because he's breaking down and crying as if he's struggling, but that he refuses to forgive them. So they respond with, his brothers went, they fell before him, and they said, Hinenu l'cha la'avadim. We are your servants. Now it could be that the first instructions they didn't say directly, they said to another, and this one was said directly, but the point was that they then come to him and they say, we're your servants, we're willing to undo what we did, which is to sell you into slavery. We'll now be your slaves.
But if someone cries in response to your saying that doesn't sound like someone who's going to be arrogant and say, I'm not going to forgive you. Why would I forgive you?
It depends.
If you're going to cry about it, that means it's touched you. It's made you feel sympathetic and sorry and whatever for whatever. My interpretation would be that he feels bad that you feel that way, that you feel the need to say this.
It could be, but it depends on how. It really depends on the body language and how the crying is done. If someone sits there and cries, but doesn't give a sort of okay kind of feeling, then that's just the person crying because they realize that they can't get past this. And that's how
Maybe it means he was so overcome with emotion that he couldn't talk, like he was just like, how do you...
But he's still, I mean, we'll keep reading, but he still doesn't forgive them. Right?
At this point, too, it's not clear if they were in front of him when he broke down and cried.
Right, it's not clear. Rashi seems to suggest that the first one was through a messenger. But either way, that crying does not translate into Yosef conceding to their request. Rashi tells us straight out that they lied. There was no such instructions from Yaakov. Yeah.
So his response is just leaving them all confused.
Right. He just cries. The guy said, if it was a messenger, he comes back and they say, so what'd he say? I don't know, he just cried.
It's very...
And so you can see how they would still be unclear.
Dr. Apple, would relate to this easy. If a woman is very upset at you, and you go ahead and you say, please forgive me for X, Y, Z, she remembers the pain, and what she does immediately, she sits down and cries. She cannot forgive you, but all you did, you open the wound, and she's going to sit down and cry.
Well, I don't want to make it a gender issue,
He's not a woman.
but
But I see his point.
To be
but there is something to be said about that, which is that when you're sort of bottling everything inside and trying to find a way to contain it and keep it, and then someone comes and raises the issue with you, so at that point, it's now in your presence, and you want to cry again. So maybe Yosef cries every time he thinks about what he went through and how his brothers treated him, and that could be. But either way, it's not translating into Yosef forgiving, because they come before him directly. This is certainly in front of him. They come before him, they fall before him, and they say, take us as your slaves. And he says to them, Al tirau, do not fear. Ki atachas elokim ani, am I in the place of God? You try to do something bad to me. But God intended it for something good, in order to be able to sustain you. So now don't worry, I will feed you, I will feed your children, and he consoles them, and he speaks to their heart, doesn't forgive them. And that's that's really, really important. Now, why doesn't he forgive them?
So how come they haven't resolved this in 17 years that they've been living together? I mean, Dad was still alive. He could have maybe helped us.
Well, I think while Yaakov is around, it seems like nobody wants to talk about this. Because that means Yaakov is going to be in charge of what goes on. We actually have to sit in court. Right? Yaakov is going to oversee this. And if he has to hear a testimony,
They have changed his process.
if the torn coat doesn't fit, you must acquit. All this. So
Even the fact that they did this at this time suggests to me that for whatever reason, you've talked about having it, formally adjudicated, but for whatever reason, his original revealing of himself, Yosef's revealing of himself, and anything that happened before then obviously left them with the view that they still needed to be forgiven, and they weren't. I mean, for whatever the reason was. So then when they did it this last time, and whatever his reaction was, and he didn't do it, I can well understand why they would sort of, in a certain sense, throw themselves on the mercy of the court. Will be your slaves. I mean, that makes
right, because sometimes you're very subtle about it. You talk about the person, and you talk to the person about it. You say, about last week, I kind of feel bad about it, and the person says, "Don't worry about it." And then you say, "No, I really feel bad about it." The person's like, "Yeah, I don't give it a second thought." But you want to hear, "I forgive you." So at some point, you have to actually turn that into. So does that mean you forgive me? And then the person is then stuck with a yes or no. And then when you actually bring yourself, which is sometimes hard to do, to say, so do you really forgive me for that? and the person says, I told you, don't worry about it, that seems to give off a no. That's.
But does that really matter? They're dismissing it, they're saying, okay, let's move on. Just like Yosef is saying, let's move on, I'm gonna take care of you, you don't have to worry, I'm not gonna
It matters.
jail you or put you in jail, I'm gonna take care of you. So.
It does matter. It does matter because
to
you
them,
don't.
Maybe.
No, it's not. You still have the sin on you, and as we'll see as we discuss this more, there's a rule that you cannot get forgiveness from heaven for a crime committed against another person unless you receive first forgiveness from that person. And if all you get is a don't worry about it, you might still be left holding the entire debt when you come up to heaven.
Is that why the story of the 10 martyrs?
Exactly. That's exactly where we're going. So the first of the Rishonim to really get into this directly is Rabbeinu Bachya. We're going to try to see different opinions on this. But the first one, and this is the most important source to go to in terms of this question, and I quote, his brothers asked him for forgiveness, and we don't find anywhere in the verses that he did forgive them. And our sages tell us, quote, whoever has transgressed against his friend and does teshuvah does not receive forgiveness until his friend is appeased. And even though the Torah says that he consoled them and he spoke to their hearts, which sounds like Yosef was appeased, that's a good word to use. However, we don't find the Torah using the word forgiveness, nor any admission on his part that he will somehow bear their sin. He never says that. And therefore they died without forgiveness from Yosef, and they are unable to receive atonement. That is why this sin remains with the Jewish people, and the story of the 10 martyrs takes place. Rabbi Bachya says that as atonement for the sale of Yosef. This sin stays with the Jewish people because Yosef refuses to forgive them.
And the number 10, since, I mean, they're different, I guess there are different ways to get to that, but, okay, so Binyamin didn't count in the number, right?
Right.
All right. So since Reuven tried to save him, and then we have Yosef himself, so it seems like we have 9 brothers who are implicated in this. Is the other brother Yosef?
That seems to be the most accepted opinion, is that Yosef actually himself needs forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Because he didn't forgive them, or he somehow caused by dibatam ra'ah.
Right. Either one of those, and probably both. He had just as much a part in the fight between him and his brothers. Mm-hmm. It takes 10 to tango, and or else he should have forgiven his brothers. And in Torah law, we consider it a sin if a person really does put themselves out there, which they did here. They came out and they said, please forgive us. They fell before him. They asked him for forgiveness, and he just didn't give it.
So that's a sin to not forgive?
That's the sin to not forgive.
So that means you don't have free choice. Because you should at least have the freedom of choice to decide if you're going to forgive somebody or not. I mean, it's really not a nice thing not to, but to say it's a sin is pretty harsh.
Yes, let me clarify that, because that's part of what we're going to get to. You do not need to forgive someone who does a terrible thing to you and then comes to you and says, I'm sorry, forgive me. You do not have to forgive them. There's a process. There's a process. If that person follows the process, then you're going to forgive them. If you are a good person, you're going to. If someone really puts themselves out and does the things that a person needs to do, not just talking about flowers, but more than that, the person does something, and sometimes someone might have done something to you where you don't think there is a thing in the world that person could possibly do for you to ever forgive them. I'm sure every person has at least a handful of such people. What they've done is unforgivable. That might be, but it's not unforgivable. You just don't expect the kind of person who would commit such a terrible thing to someone to actually change in a way where they would be deserving of forgiveness. But in theory, there is something that someone could do. And if a person does do all those things, as brought down in halacha, the process, 3 times, and they ask you in the right way, in different ways, in different places, and they come to you. So, assuming they do the right thing, there's going to be forgiveness. Now, we don't see the brothers coming 3 times, although maybe you could say that they did. I mean, especially if you say they sent a messenger, and then they came themselves, maybe that would be considered like 2. It's hard to know. Hard to know.
But, so you are saying that it is actually a sin to not forgive if somebody's gone through the right process.
Right. The language of the Shulchan Aruch is if a person has gone through and done all the right things. Let me get the exact words.
Because at first you said he's not a very nice person if he doesn't forgive. So that's different than saying he's sinned.
Yes. Basically, the term used is the person is achzari. That's a cruel person. You can call it a sin. You want to call it a failure in midos. That's open to definition. But we definitely consider that a person has to somehow, assuming that the other person is taking the right steps, you have to forgive them. So that's Rabbeinu Bachya. By the way, Rabbeinu Bachya adds a beautiful explanation. He says that's why the brothers say, please forgive the sins of your brothers. Please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. Meaning, we are your brothers, you should forgive us. We are fellow servants of God, please forgive us. Why break that up into 2? So it says Rabbeinu Bachya, because they were trying to tell him that they realize that they can't receive forgiveness from God until they receive forgiveness from Him. So they're sort of hinting to that dual aspect of forgiveness necessary within the request for forgiveness.
And any commentary on why he didn't do this?
Yes. Chassam Sofer.
Stack of books.
So says the Chassam Sofer. But tzarich tam, my time lo machal am beferish. What's Yosef's problem? His brothers are clearly repentant. Why doesn't he forgive them? So the question is an important question. I'll tell you his answer, the Chassam Sofer's answer, but you might not like his answer. Chassam Sofer quotes a Gemara in Masechtas Yoma. I'll read you the Gemara. Rav have a pasuk sidra kamei de Rabbi. Rav was, should I say, reciting or was studying a certain chapter in the Tanakh before Rabbi. Rav was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Ayil aser Rabbi Chia. So Rabbi Chia walked in. Hadar l'reisha, and Rabbi had them start over again. So that's obviously annoying. You're getting into the chapter of the Tanakh, and 10 minutes into the shir, someone else walks in, and so he says, "Oh, all right, we're going to start again." So you have to listen to those 10 minutes of speech over again. Another 10 minutes go by. Ayel Bar Kapara, and Bar Kapara enters. Rabbi says, "Oh, Bar Kapara is here. We're going to start over again." Okay, but now it's good because also Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi. Then Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, walks in, and Rabbi starts over again. At this point, Rav he's heard this first 10 minutes 3 times already. And then Rabbi Chanina walks in. He just throws up his hands in frustration. He says, Kule hai hadav v'nezel, are we really going to go back again from the beginning? Lo hadar. So Rabbi said, okay, we won't. We'll just continue from where we left off. And Rabbi Chanina was upset because he's missing the first 10 minutes of the shir.
Come on time.
Right? So So Rav went to Rabbi Hanina 13 Yom Kippurs, 13 Erev Yom Kippurs. And Rabbi Hanina refused to forgive him. Came to him on Erev Yom Kippur and said, "You remember that time when I said that?" He says, "No, I don't forgive you. I'm sorry, I can't do it." So he comes back the next year Erev Yom Kippur, and the next year after that Erev Yom Kippur, he comes back 13 Erev Yom Kippurs, and he refuses to forgive him.
I thought you only had to do it 3 times.
Yep. Says the Gemara, how could he do this? But Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina said, if you ask forgiveness from your friend, you're not allowed to ask more than 3 times. Sounds like you're not allowed to ask more than 3 times. Says the Gemara, Rav Shani. Rav was stringent with himself. Which sounds like what we're saying is that you're not allowed to ask 3 times. You're not required to ask more than 3 times for forgiveness. But if you so choose to go more than 3 times, you're allowed to. Says the Gemara, okay, that explains Rav going back 13 times and asking for forgiveness. But how could Rabbi Hanina do this? But we learned, Kalamavir al midosav, someone who lets things go, Mavirin lo al kol psha'av, such a person, their sins are forgiven. Which means, we're understanding, that means you're supposed to let things go. So how could Rabbi Hanina, 13 years, he's holding on to a grudge about Rav who made him miss 10 minutes of a shir? Rabbi Hanina saw a dream, L'Rav de zakfuhu bedikla, that they hung Rav from a palm tree. Now, don't get worried. If you dream about someone being hung from a palm tree, then that means that person is going to become a Rosh Yeshiva. Because dreams do not mean what you think they see. They're actually usually the opposites. Dreams work by association, which means it can be something as silly as if you see a watch in a dream. Watch starts with a W. W is what water starts with. Water flows. Honey flows. You dip the apple in the honey. Apples grow on trees. Trees need sunlight. And therefore, you see a watch, it means that your body is missing some sunlight. Because that's how dreams work. It can be even crazier than that. The Gemara in the last chapter of Brachos has pages and pages of dream interpretations. We would go, really? Those things don't sound like, but that's dreams work with association. I've heard that Freud himself had a Masechtas Brachos on his shelf, so he could look up those relevant Gemaras. But he was a Jew, he learned Gemara. So he should have done Daf Yomi. So he saw this dream.
Read Gemara?
Well, they didn't have art scroll in those days. But they could be that they had German translations. That wouldn't surprise me. That would be
a mistake. It was a Freudian slip.
Right. So he saw a dream that he was going to be a Rosh Yeshiva. Now, what's the problem with that? Because Rabbi Hanina was next in line to be a Rosh Yeshiva. And therefore, Rav becoming a Rosh Yeshiva meant Rabbi Hanina passing away. So what? So what does he do by not forgiving him? Well, he didn't forgive him. It was 13 years he refused to forgive him. So what does he accomplish by not forgiving him?
Longevity?
Well, how does that give him long life? How does that stop Rav from being Rosh Yeshiva? So you may have known this, but Rabbi Yehuda Anasi is the last generation where Torah was centered in Eretz Yisrael. The next generation after the Mishnah would be when the Jews disperse, and there would be the 2 major yeshivas opened in Babylonia by Rav and Shmuel, in Surah and Pumbedisa and Harda, all these other yeshivas in Babylon. So Rashi explains that he wanted, when Rabbi Hanina becomes a Rosh Yeshiva, he wanted Rav to travel to Babylon because he didn't get along with him. So he really forgave him. It was just a show to make Rav feel uncomfortable in his presence, forcing Rav to move to another town, which he did. He moved all the way to a different country. And Rav opened his yeshiva in this other country. And therefore, Rabbi Chanina would live longer because Rav's being the Rosh Yeshiva did not require the demise of Rabbi Chanina.
Wait, so Rabbi Chanina actually forgave him?
Yeah, according to this, he did forgive him.
So you mean you don't have to tell the person that you were forgiven?
Well, that's what it sounds like. So, that's what seems, the way Rashi is reading the Gemara, is that he really forgave him. He just wanted him to think that he didn't, so Rav would feel uncomfortable, and he would move somewhere else and open a yeshiva somewhere else, so that Rav's becoming Rosh Yeshiva would not necessitate the passing of Rabbi Chanina. Okay, so
Seems pretty convoluted.
it worked. It can't be, it's not convoluted if it worked, because Rav does end up moving out of Eretz Yisrael and going to Babylon, opening a yeshiva.
Is that why he moved?
It could be. At least that's the way Rashi's reading it, that he felt that Eretz Yisrael wasn't his place because he had offended, basically, the main Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael.
I think there's a major point to be had here, though, that what you say and what is received by the person verbally may or may not match your own feelings inside. In other words, Yosef could have said, oh yeah, I forgive you, but still, deep inside, that's 22 years as a slave. That's pretty tough to feel in your gut. So in other words, the feelings and the words for the sake of the other person may or may not be coincident, which is obviously not in this case.
Right, so we want to go there. Except in this case, it's actually opposite. Because here he forgives him, but tells him that he doesn't. While in the case of Yosef, he doesn't tell them he forgives them because he doesn't forgive them. And that's a terrible thing to do. To tell someone you forgive them when you don't. Because that person walks away not knowing that there's still something being held against them.
So which is the bad thing?
Well, it could be they're both bad. But it's much worse to tell someone you forgive them when you don't. If you tell someone you forgive them and they feel everything's okay and they don't know they still need to apologize and they still need to come and do things and they still need to correct the problem, you just tell them you forgive them. That's a terrible thing to do.
Wouldn't that be viewed as the person did forgive them? If someone says to you, I forgive you, but deep down they don't mean it,
I would think that's not forgiveness.
I would think that if they are saying it to you, they want to feel differently inside, they don't, but they're telling you, I forgive you.
But if you don't mean it, how is that forgiveness? If you keep bothering me, I don't want to deal with you, and you keep asking me, please forgive me, and I think to myself, come on, 3 times a day, I can't do this. Okay, you know what? I forgive you. And the person says, really? I say, yeah, I forgive you. Go ahead. It's all fine. I forgive the number 4, give you, the letter U. So that's it. So I got my forgiveness, and now that person's going to go away. But I'm just glad that person is gone. So that's unfair. It could be that in this case, that person might even be able to receive forgiveness from heaven because
they were told that
they were forgiven. Or maybe not. Or it could be there's a technicality. If you don't have real forgiveness, it doesn't work.
But how are you supposed to know what real forgiveness is?
Yeah, so which means that if someone gives you a sign or tells you that they forgive you but they don't, then that person could really cause you great harm in the long run. That's possible. So says the Chasam Sofer. I'm going to tell you what he says, and it's unbelievable. He says, Yosef wanted the brothers to be uncomfortable in his presence, and because he wanted them to go back to Eretz Yisrael. He wanted his brothers, after Yaakov dies, he wanted the brothers to go back up to Eretz Yisrael and not remain in Egypt. But he knew that any telling them that they should go back to Eretz Yisrael for some reason wouldn't work. So he wanted to make them feel uncomfortable so that they would leave. And he says, in the same way that we see that Rabbi Hanina was allowed to pretend that he doesn't forgive them in order to get Rav to do something which is either for Rav's benefit, he should be able to be a Rosh Hashiva, or for his benefit, he should be able to live. Yosef felt the same thing. Okay, anyway, he ends up taking this to another place, but
This doesn't, it doesn't seem to me logical, because supposedly the Avot learned Torah. So
Right.
he learned Torah, he knows that the Bris Ben Haftarim says that you're going to be strangers in a foreign land. He knows Hashem, he says Hashem was the one who put me here, so he knows that there was a reason for him going to Mitzrayim. So I would have thought
to
that he would have-
sustain them in famine. To sustain, he keeps saying that Hashem put me here to sustain you in the famine. And they said, we say in the Haggadah, Lo Yared Yaakov Avinu l'shtakea b'Mitzrayim, elu lagur sham. They didn't come down to. Yaakov seemed to suggest to the Paro, to the people, that they were gonna, the whole time they were planning Aliyah. They had the date on the wall and everything.
What about Redu, 210?
It doesn't, at least the way the Chassam Sofer is reading it, is that they thought that that's a possibility, or that maybe Yosef would stay down there, or that someone would stay down there, but that Yaakov himself and maybe his sons were not required to be part of that slavery. And he says, the language of Yosef, the language of Chassam Sofer, is that Yosef actually doesn't say anything about the taking up of his bones until he was about to die, because he always felt that there would be some kind of return, in which case he wouldn't be able to ask his brothers to carry him up. That's what Chassam Sofer says. And you're right, it is a difficulty. You have to fit that into all the Midrashim, and how are they understanding what their plan to come down is. But I want to bring this back to our ethical dilemma, which is, that means that the Chassam Sofer is reading, using the Gemara in Yoma, that Yosef really forgave them. He forgave them, but felt that there was some benefit to them believing that he didn't.
Doesn't go too well with the martyrs then.
Right, this definitely doesn't work
That he
with...
forgave them.
Well, the Chassam Sofer is he actually doesn't even say those words. He just says he didn't forgive them openly, which means Chassam Sofer is suggesting in his words that he really did forgive them. He just never said it to them because he wanted them to leave for their own benefit. Yeah, I just find it difficult that you can manipulate someone like that. Yosef's clearly been doing it all this time. He had his brothers believe that he was some crazy, evil viceroy who's just out to get them. He had them going on that, and they were totally falling for it. So it makes sense that Yosef somehow feels he can manipulate their processes and their thoughts. But this is tough. He wants. If he wants to, he can instruct them to go up. Try that before you try breaking their hearts like this, where they think they don't have forgiveness for what is their only and possibly their only and their most serious crime.
He's also saying, I'll sustain you and your young ones, so that's an inducement to stay there.
Yeah, that's true. You're right.
Right, he's saying, I'll feed you, but
That's why I'm confused too.
He's going to feed them long distance.
He said, I'll feed you, I'll take care of you.
right. But he wants them to be uncomfortable with that.
No.
He wants them to say, we can't take that because obviously it's not real, and he wants them to leave.
What about him wanting to do tshuva? Maybe that was his motivation. So
It sounds like they've already done so much tshuva. They've come before him. They've asked him for forgiveness. Right?
They lied.
They're willing to lie. Good one. Yeah. Okay. So a few years ago, we had the merit of learning some of the Sefer, the Divrei Shaul. And even though we didn't do this particular piece in the Divrei Shaul when we were learning the Sefer, but I was sort of saving this for when we get a chance to discuss this topic of forgiveness. The Divrei Shaul is in Parshas Vayelech, where it says in the Torah, "V'chara api bo bayomahu." God says, "I will become angry. My anger will flare on that day. V'azavtim, and I will abandon them. V'histarti panai mehem, and I will hide my face from the Jewish people. And then the Jewish people will say, this is all because God is not with me, etc. V'anochi haster astir panai bayom ahu, and I will haster, like surely, completely hide my face on that day. So he says, the Divrei Shaul, it says in Tehillim, and we say this in our morning davening during Tachanan, we ask Hashem, Al be'apcha sochicheni. Please do not reprove us with your anger. What does that mean? So he says that there's two ways that you can express that you're angry at someone. Either by letting them have it, or by ignoring them. And the kinder of the two is to let the person have it. To express your anger, to tell them how you feel, to let loose a tirade of words that you are allowed to say and words that you're not allowed to say, just so that the person realizes how angry you are. That is a kindness compared to refusing to acknowledge the person, not answering the phone, avoiding that person entirely. That is cruel. And he says that the verse, Al ba'apcha sochicheni, do not reprove us with your anger, means don't let the anger itself be a reproof. Please, Hashem, do not punish us by distancing yourself from us. And that's v'anochi haster aster pana bayom ahu. That's why it's so bad, because it's Hashem ignoring the Jewish people. We pray to him, and he refuses to listen because his face has been hidden. That is the ultimate pain, the ultimate difficulty that the Jewish people can go through. So hear these words, because this is powerful. The term the Torah uses for the brothers said, Lu Yistamenu Yosef. What's the translation of Lu? Lamed Vav Lu. So where have you had this before? Let's take earlier in Sefer Bereshis, where Avraham prays, Lu Yishmael Yichya Lefanecha. What does that word Lu mean there? If only. Lu, says the Divrei Shaul, unbelievable explanation. Lu Yistamenu Yosef, which we translate, look at Ani Chumash, it says, but what if Yosef hates us? Says the Divrei Shaul, that's a mistranslation. If only Yosef would let us have it. The brothers didn't care about the punishment. They wanted Yosef to show them a little more hatred. He was being so nice to them, they couldn't stand it. You can't be nice to someone. How could you be nice to me after what we've done to you? He's feeding them, calls them up every week and say, how's the food, how's the housing? We can't handle it. They wouldn't be so. If you know what, even if you don't do that, and here he's telling them they come for forgiveness. You know what? If you would have just said, it's fine, that's one thing. But he says, no, don't worry. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to feed your children. Everything's going to be okay. You need anything, you call me. Have my guy. Here's my number. He says they couldn't take it. Malkein Amru, they said, Lu Yistamenu Yosef, if only Yosef would hate us. Meaning, if he would just let us have it, if he would just express anger at us, if he would just give us that tirade that we want, and that's what they're saying. When he cries, they said, he brought up the emotions. And they say, okay, good, he's ready. He's crying, that means he's feeling it. Let's go before him and fall as slaves before him. And then finally he'll let us have it. And he refuses. They wanted to hear Yosef tell them off, just like we want that Hashem should punish us for our sins and not ignore us and refuse to accept all our prayers. Because that's much worse. Brilliant explanation from the Divrei Shaul, which fits perfectly in the translation of Lu. It's almost hard to understand how anyone translates the word Lu as, what do they do here? Perhaps. It's not perhaps. Lu means if only. they wanted Yosef to let them have it. Says the Divrei Shol that maybe Yosef could have forgiven them if he would have allowed himself to do that act of cruelty of making them feel bad for what they've done. But as we talked last week, Yosef's mindset is that I don't want my brothers to feel bad, that even when he reveals himself to them, he was so into making sure that they realize it's min Hashem, it's from Hashem, it's min Hashemayim, don't worry. He was so worried about them that he forgot what they really needed. In his care for them and in his attempt to do them a favor, he actually did them the greatest injustice of not giving them the anger, the rant that they needed to feel better.
What happened about learning in Midos, like in, what's the name of the sefer that we were learning with Midos? How bad anger is, and you should control your anger, and you shouldn't take it out on people, and you should, learn to
Right.
suppress it, and, let it go. What happened to that?
That you should do that when that's not what the person needs. That's what we're saying.
So you're supposed to figure out when people need your anger, and then give it to them.
Right. When someone has done something really bad, and they don't get how you feel, it is your obligation to go to that person and say, it really hurt me what you did. And especially if that person comes to you first, which is always a lot easier, because it should really be the person who is the aggressor, who is the assailant, who should come to the victim and say, I'm sorry for what I did. If you are really angry at that person and you want to downplay it, that's not okay. If in order for you to forgive them, you need to give them that tirade. Especially if you're doing nothing but good to that person, you have to let them have it. And this is true especially with children, and some adults need to be treated like children. People who are not mature enough to understand when what they've done is really bad. So you are required to say to them, you don't just say to them, it's okay, we'll let it go. You have to tell them that was a really bad thing. In terms of how angry you become, without question, you can never, ever, there's never an excuse to become so angry that you lose yourself. But they didn't need that. They didn't need Yosef to turn red in the face and have steam coming out of his ears, and all that wasn't necessary. They just needed him to say, how could you? I'm your brother. I saw your brother. You guys, that's crazy. And to tell them, I'm angry at you. And the brothers wanted it, and they were begging for it, and Yosef refuses to give it to them.
What about the Beis Halevi that says that when he said, Ani Yosef Od Avichai, that was in some ways a statement, a very strong rebuke. What about that? Wouldn't that? I mean, it.
Right. Well, the Medrash says, right? If you see the shame that the brothers experienced, but he was. That's part of what we discussed last week. It's just he used the wrong words to reveal himself. So that was a self-imposed rebuke. He wasn't trying to rebuke them. He said, I'm Yosef. And then the first question that comes to mind is, I know we've all been lying to each other and telling each other stuff. Is father really alive? They took that as, I'm Yosef, and now, did you guys really kill our father? Or some other type. They mistook it, and they became embarrassed, so he changes it and says, I am Yosef, don't worry, it was all min Hashemayim. That's sort of what we discussed last week. So I'm saying the regret which they feel, and the reproof which they feel, at least from the language of the Midrash, is that was self-imposed. If the Beis Halevi takes it that somehow in his words he was adding to that, that's certainly not the simple reading of the verse, and it's still not that explicit forgiveness, especially since he downplays it afterwards and tries to make them feel better.
But
right.
But I guess there's still the issue that he didn't forgive them.
Right, but we're saying now, even if you say that there was some reproof there, he never even said to them, how could you guys do it? He never told them off for it. Like straight out saying, I'm angry at you for having done that. Even that would have been enough. That's a chiddush of the Divrei Shol. Even if he doesn't forgive them, to at least let them have it so that they feel. And this is where I want to go with whatever little time I have, is that it could be that that's really the game that Yosef is playing the whole time in Parshas Miketz. All the way back when he's doing that, as much as he's trying to rehabilitate his brothers and to make them feel bad and to realize that they shouldn't have done what they did, maybe at the same time he's trying to work on himself to forgive them. Maybe he doesn't want to reveal himself to them until he's ready to forgive them. So he follows them around and hears them talking, and they say, well, we sold Yosef, we shouldn't have sold Yosef, it was your fault for selling Yosef, and they have this whole discussion, and he overhears it and he cries. So we have different explanations for why he cries, but maybe one of the reasons why he's crying is because he wants to forgive them, but he doesn't. He doesn't forgive them.
Maybe that was the time of his anger. Maybe that's where he did express his anger to them by saying, oh, you're spies. And, he was incognito there. And so he could let it out.
Maybe for himself.
Right.
Right.
So he let it out and he's like, okay, you guys, I'm going to give it back to you. You're spies and don't come back here.
Right. Maybe. But as we know, whatever Yosef's plan is, he never follows through on it. Because at the beginning of Parshas Vayigash, it says Yosef could no longer control himself. He couldn't hold back anymore. So whatever he's trying to do, and that's what I'm suggesting, maybe he was trying to do it to himself. He was trying to get himself there to forgive them, but he couldn't take it anymore. And so he stops in the middle, and so he fails to bring himself. Then his father shows up, and they have this great reunion, and they have 17 happy years together, and then the father dies, and he never followed through on it. And the brothers know that he never followed through. They can sense it. People can always sense it when someone's still angry at them. And so now they come before him and they say, forgive us. And again, the answer is that maybe Yosef is with the spies and the whole thing you play, maybe that's enough that he can handle them being there. Not like the Chassam Sofer, that he wanted them to leave town. Even though Chassam Sofer doesn't say he wanted them to leave town because he wanted them out of his presence, but more he wanted for their benefit. But at least he's gotten himself so far through whatever he has done that he can handle his brothers and he can be nice to them. But as the Divrei Shol is saying, he's being too nice to them. Too much. It's just too much. You can't, when you're, I want to say if a let's take an example of a spouse, although no one here ever has disagreements with their spouse. But let's just use it as an example, because in the outside world. So what can happen is, if let's say the husband may have done something to offend his wife. And so if he comes home and things are a little uneasy, so things are uneasy. If she tells him that she's upset, that's actually good. If she ignores him, that's bad. But what's worse is if she's being exceptionally nice, doing things maybe for him, or in the other case, the husband doing something for the wife that he may not have done before. At that point, you get a food taster, right? And if someone's presenting you, because that's just intolerable. That's just intolerable. That means that the anger is so bad that it's somehow been turned into something in the other direction. That means things are really, really bad. And the more kindness one is being shown, which is not the typical kindness, the worse the situation is. This is true of both spouses. If someone uses very slow and deliberate language when they talk to you, that means, it might not even be, sometimes a person just talks like that because they're angry, but you can see, and that, according to the way the Divrei Shal is taken, that's what Yosef is doing to them.
it's interesting because he makes it clear he's not taking revenge, and yet what you're saying is, in fact, instead, he's killing them with kindness.
Right, right. And now I don't want to go to reverse psychology and say that because of that he's therefore punishing them. He's punishing them he's taking vengeance on them by giving them over kindness and not allowing them the forgiveness. And that vengeance which he's taking on them should be his way of making his brothers feel bad for what they've done so that he can get himself to forgive them. I wouldn't quite go there. But the simple reading, at least the way he's taking it, is that Yosef is refusing to forgive them. So this leaves us, and we'll try to finish this with the following question. Questions. If you can't forgive someone, if you don't forgive someone, what's the best thing to do? And every situation is going to be different. I can't forgive this person. Am I supposed to tell them I don't forgive them? Do I have a right to do things to that person, to punish them, if the purpose is for me to lead myself to forgive them? Can I, if let's say, let's not use an example of let's say a neighbor, step away from spouses for a minute. Let's say a neighbor does something and I'm angry at them. So can I maybe pull their garbage can back up to the top of the driveway on garbage day, and that way their garbage doesn't get picked up and they get the raccoons? So I've done that to them because they did something to insult me, but I'm only doing it because after a few more of these things, some toilet paper in their trees and some other things, I'll feel ready to forgive them. Is that okay? No? It's for their benefit. They've asked me for forgiveness. They want my forgiveness. And I know that in order for me to forgive them, I need to do this stuff.
Isn't that revenge? Even though you're doing it...
Now, I'm not doing it for vengeance.
Yeah, you're saying you're not doing it for vengeance, but in the end, you probably are doing it.
Yeah, but I know that's what I need to do to forgive them.
No, but
You
you're
need
not
to be
allowed to...
vengeful.
You're not allowed to...
Well, yeah, but I'm not doing it because for the sake of the vengeance. They ask me for forgiveness, and I say, no, I'm doing it ultimately because I know I want to forgive this person. I want to be a good person.
You're
But
telling yourself that.
You wouldn't revenge them if they hadn't asked for forgiveness.
right. So is that okay? Is that okay? I mean,
I am never asking you for forgiveness.
right. I'll just finish with one story. I've mentioned this story before, but Rabbi Lapian was once approached by a person asking for forgiveness. And he said to him, well, what'd you do to me? So he says, well, I'm not comfortable telling you what I did. So he says, well, then I don't forgive you. And Rabbi Lapian is one of the greatest Bali Musar of the previous generation. So he says, well, why don't you forgive me? He says, because I can tell you I'll forgive you, but I don't forgive you if I don't know what you did to me. So the person said, fine. And he told Rabbi Lapian what he did to him. And Rabbi Lapian says, I don't forgive you. But come back to me in 2 weeks. I'd like to work on this. The man came back in 2 weeks, and Rabbi Lapian said, I forgive you. He didn't forgive that person, but he knew that he needed to. And he was being serious. He wasn't going to send this person away. Yeah, it's fine. And then sort of go back and work on himself to try to forgive the person. He wanted to forgive the person. The person had done something terrible. He had, said something about him to someone else that had caused him a certain harm and whatever. That's you're not supposed to be a super person with no feelings and no emotions and just be some magical person who forgives. And we're not expecting Yosef, who's sold into slavery by his brothers. I'm sorry, but whatever we may have gone through, you have not been sold into slavery and then sat in prison for 13 years and all this other stuff that happened to you because your brothers, I'm sorry, I'm not even telling the story right. They first tried to kill him. They were going to execute him, just take his head off. Then one of the brothers convinced them that that's not nice. So instead they were going to throw him in a pit filled with snakes and scorpions. Right? I mean, so you can't just forgive someone for that. And he's been trying, he's been working on this all these years. So we're not blaming Yosef for not forgiving them. But somewhere someone failed. And we would think that that's got to be Yosef's fault here. Maybe he needs to see what his brothers need. Maybe he needs to give them what they want. So to answer the point which you raised at the beginning, we have to say, that's why it's the clearest explanation, that in fact Yosef is the one who the 10th martyr represents. Only 9 brothers sold Yosef. Reuven seems to be, he was really, the Torah tells us, he was trying to save his life. So you've got 9 brothers who continue to want to kill him or sell him. So where's the 10th martyr? Yosef is struggling with this in the parasha. And we don't want, this is on his level, we don't want to look at our forefathers as angels. They were human beings. And obviously, if any time someone would have insulted Yosef on a minor level, he would have immediately forgiven that person. But we're talking about something serious, and you have to contemplate and figure it out. And maybe he felt the brothers hadn't done enough. Maybe the brothers felt they had done enough. But in the end, this leads us. We have to really contemplate. The people who we don't forgive, why don't we forgive them? The people who we do forgive, how do we forgive them? And the people who we need forgiveness from, what should we be doing to receive the forgiveness in a much greater way than just saying to the person, are we cool now? Right, thank you.